Started?
I think so, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, well, great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is the Purple Line Corridor Management Committee. I'm Charlie Zelle, Chair of Met Council and Chair of the committee. So welcome and thanks for giving your time. There is just a little housekeeping first, as always. First, when you are speaking, feel free to turn your camera on. And if you are not speaking, you can keep the camera on if you wish or not, but it would be great if you would mute yourself. And also, you can always press the hand raise if you'd like to speak, and we'll find you. Also, please feel free to use the chat, asking any questions, making comments. The meeting is going to be recorded by the Met Council. It's going to be available for viewing really almost right after the meeting. Also, as always, the agendas, minutes, presentation materials will all be available at the website, which is metrotransit.org/purple-line-project-committees. Did everybody get that? Anyway, I think you see it there in front of you, and feel free to check in or bookmark that, and you can find materials as they are presented. They'll shortly be in there. So in the process of recording the meetings, we sent out an agenda, but we also sent out a summary from last meetings. And unless there's any corrections or additions or suggestions for changes, I will accept them to be accepted. And really today, most importantly on the agenda, we're going to focus on two areas: the community outreach and engagement update, continuing and really important work. And then also we'll be looking at the BRT route modification study phase 2 update, kind of where we are. And with that, before we get into the substance, or rather than introduce everybody, which could take a lot of time, but I do want to kind of shout out for Nat Gorham, who's MnDOT's transit director. And I think, Nat, you're here, so say hello. And also, I know that you're representing, well, Mike Barnes, who's retiring after years of great service today, I believe. And I know, and maybe unless April Crockett is here as well, maybe Nat, you're representing MnDOT.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Zelle. Yeah, I'm here on April's behalf, who's here. Well, Mike Barnes left maybe yesterday was his last day, so he'll be missed. But I'm here, and I'll take back any issues we have back to MnDOT. But thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. Thanks for joining us. All right, so let's start with our community outreach and engagement update. And once again, Liz Jones has been leading the way. Take it, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, everybody. Liz Jones, Outreach and Engagement Lead on Purple Line. We can go to the next slide, please. Just want to give a little bit of an update of what we've been up to since our big kind of push throughout this spring and summer. We've been doing a lot of engagement and awareness building, particularly along the whole Purple Line corridor, but particularly along the Maryland and Wiper Avenue corridor, letting folks know that we're looking at this corridor and how they can stay engaged with us and we can collect their feedback. So we've had a lot of engagement that we talked about at the last CMC and what we've heard regarding existing conditions and our station location outreach. So we're just really continuing that effort before we start this next phase for what we're calling the Tier 2 evaluation engagement, which I'll talk about later in this presentation. We're really wanting to continue to and follow up with folks regarding station locations, existing conditions of the corridor, and just awareness building about the project and this effort that we are embarking on, and to make sure that we are engaging with folks. So this first bullet here, you'll see Iowa high-rise engagement. Throughout our station location engagement, really the Larpenteur station and the area around where the Iowa high-rise is located was what we heard the most feedback on from the community of we should potentially think about shifting that station location to better serve the Iowa high rise. So we want to hear more directly from the folks who live at the high rise. We've started engaging with them, and we have some upcoming engagements as well to continue to understand their needs and transit use. We are still doing community pop-ups, so we attend the Ramsey County Service Center, both downtown St. Paul and the pop-up at Maplewood Mall, the Service Center in Maplewood Mall. So that's been really great to reach folks, a lot of folks who utilize transit as well. And also, so some of these kind of popping up in community spaces, again, to continue conversations, as well as specific stakeholder engagement, which will continue throughout the rest of this fall and winter here. For example, working with mHealth Fairview, St. John's on potential routing to St. John's, since we are now looking to potentially come the other direction with this new corridor. Continuing with business and community groups, for example, Friends of the Parks and Trails of St. Paul and Ramsey County. We talked to them last week. Continuing canvassing and awareness building throughout businesses and residents throughout the corridor. And continuing our community and business advisory committee meetings, which will meet again next month to kind of talk through updates that we are covering at this corridor management committee meeting here. And also we've recruited some new folks that represent more of the Maryland and Whitebear Avenue corridor, since our initial makeup of this committee was what's still our official LPA to downtown Whitebear Lake, and wanting to get additional folks on the committee to represent this corridor. So we are still recruiting to add additional folks to our community and business advisory committee, kind of doing an amendment to add additional folks. And then once we do have a new purple line, we'll kind of do a formal resitting of that committee. So still kind of doing a lot of outreach and engagement ahead of our big push that I'll talk about later on, which will be next year once we actually have more concept designs to talk about. Next slide, please. Part of this current engagement activities right now is we've begun corridor walking and rolling tours. So we've been meeting corridor residents and businesses out on the corridor to walk and roll the area. So we've kind of chunked up the corridor in 5 segments and brought a lot of our engineering team and just project staff to really be able to take a look at and see exactly what we're talking about and gather that more helpful information for our design team as they work to figure out what this corridor will look like and the development of our concept designs. We did have a little hiccup with our mailers that went out. So we found out that a lot of folks did not get good notice for the first date. So we're looking to add an additional opportunity for the Whitebear Avenue between the 11th and Jarvis to Beam segment. So we'll be sure to share that. We also had some rain last Friday. So we're adding more dates and rescheduling for rain. We are supposed to have a tour tomorrow, but we are monitoring the rain. That might have to be rescheduled as well. But we are looking to cover all of these segments throughout this month. So we'll be doing more door knocking and social media and emails and calling folks who've signed up to make sure that they're aware if we're rescheduling or if we do add other dates to share those opportunities, and we can share that with all of you as well. These are just some of our postcards and flyers that we have been using in canvassing and sending out to community and neighborhood groups as well as that mailer. Just a snapshot of those. And that's all I have right now. And like I mentioned, I will be chatting a little bit later about what we have planned early next year for our next really big engagement push.
Thanks, Liz. Let's just take a pause and see if there's any questions for Liz at this point. Engagement process. I don't see any hands.
Councilmember Villavicencio has her hand up.
Oh, she does. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Liz, for the update. I really appreciate everything that you and your team do. I was so pleasantly surprised to see the team at my actual bus stop on County Road C and Whitebear Avenue. And because it is actually it's definitely not one of the more popular ones, stops, but it is more popular than probably people think. So I appreciate seeing the team there. And the only, I guess, comment that I would have, or what I was hoping to see going forward, is maybe doing some like targeted outreach to specific groups of folks. I know there's probably a lot of need for specific communication in the disability and senior community. And, I would love to be in assistance and connect people with whomever to try to facilitate that. But I also believe that there needs to be other outreach groups targeted as well in communication. And I would also love to help out with any of that too. So just to be a bridge builder. So but yes, again, thank you, Liz, for all the things that your team does, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, council member. And chair and committee members, Councilmember Villavicencio, I'll definitely reach out to you to make sure that we have all your ideas incorporated before we do our next big outreach push next year. And definitely during this fall, winter period, want to do more targeted outreach with specific property owners and stakeholders, and really get folks ready once we actually have layouts and really more details to share and to collect feedback next year. So I appreciate your willingness to jump in and help us. So I'll be talking to you soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll second that. Thank you, Nikki, both the ideas and your offer to be a bridge builder. That's really helpful. And I think that shows great commitment to the project and also really practical help. So thank you. Any other comments or questions for Liz at this point? All right, well then maybe let's move on to the route modification study phase 2 update. We have the lead, Beth Bartz, and engineering and project manager, Lisa Wall. They're going to walk us through the process and the outcomes of the tier 1 screening. So welcome, Beth.
Thank you,
and
Chair.
Lisa.
I'm going to kick us off this afternoon. Lisa will join in a couple of slides to share some of the options. We're both from Kimley Horn and working with the consultant team on this project. And we are very happy on behalf of the project to be sharing these interim results with you on the route modification study. And as you know, we're looking at studying an alternative route using Maryland Avenue and White Bear Avenue to move between the area right by Phelan Village up to the Maplewood Mall. So today we'll be talking you through how we've been identifying transit options for that alignment. And this graphic that you're seeing in front of you now provides an overview of that RMS study showing the CMC key decision points there along the top line. So last month we shared with you the proposed station locations to be studied as part of RMS phase 2. Today we're going to focus on the process for identifying and evaluating options for how to incorporate transit into those existing roadways. We've identified 4 options that we're recommending be developed into full layouts for a detailed examination of how each of these options serve transit needs, address multimodal movements through and across the corridor, and how each of these options will serve the community. In our presentation today, we're going to provide you an overview of the process of how we got to those 4 options and why we believe that those are great options for us to be looking at further. So next slide. This graphic shows really the 4 tiers of the process that we are using to both identify the universe of options and conduct a tier 1 screening. Those are the 2 steps that we have completed to date. As I said earlier, our next step will be to do the tier 2 evaluation, where we dig in a little bit in more detail. And then ultimately, we will compare the best White Bear Avenue corridor option with our previous alignment on Bruce Vento Trail to inform the determination of a locally preferred alternative. And at each of these 4 stations, as illustrated by the funnel graphic, we're narrowing that range of options and developing a greater amount of engineering detail and understanding at a more detailed level about both the potential community benefits and impacts at each stage. And I just want to remind all of you that we have been not doing this in a vacuum, but we've been getting a lot of input from our advisory committee structure through the issue resolution teams and the technical advisory committee that include members of each of the corridor jurisdictions, as well as the counties, Metro Transit operational groups, et cetera. Also the CBAC community, ultimately coming to you as the CMC, but also being informed by the great input that we're getting through the engagement activities that Liz just recapped. Those community group meetings, the canvassing work, the open houses. We're gaining insights and inputs all along the way from the public that have been folded into our evaluation process. So just to maybe give you a bit of a glimpse into the things that we've been looking at as we think through the options here, we began our process with a broad review of some existing conditions. And as you can see here, we've highlighted some of the key characteristics of each of these roadways. We have quite a few businesses on these corridors and quite a high number of residential properties. So we know we need to get the input and consider the benefits and the impacts to those businesses and residents as we are designing our options. We also have a lot of driveway access that's associated with those both business and residential properties, and on White Bear Avenue in particular, how the transit design responds to and interacts with those driveways is going to be really important, not only from traffic flow, but also a safety perspective. We are looking at the number of sidewalk opportunities we have on both sides of the street to get people to and from our stations. We're looking at the total number of pedestrian crossings. I'll show you a map in a few slides that highlights where we are seeing the highest number of daily pedestrian crossings in the corridor. There's quite a few on Maryland, a slightly small number at various locations on White Bear Avenue. And then we're also thinking about the traffic impacts, which during the PM peak hour is about 1,200 vehicles on Maryland Avenue and a little bit more than double that on White Bear, approximately 2,500 vehicles per hour. Just to put that into some kind of context, the 1,200 vehicles an hour, some simple math, equates to about 20 cars a minute, or 1 car every 3 seconds in one of each of the 4 lanes of that roadway. So we've got 2 lanes in each direction. White Bear Avenue is just about double that, or about 42 cars a minute during that peak period. So just to dig into those characteristics just a little bit more, as I said, the pedestrian volumes, and here we're looking at pedestrian volumes on Maryland and on Beam Avenue. Our highest pedestrian crossing location is Maryland and Clarence, with about 665 crossings in the 13-hour period where we see most pedestrian activity from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Maryland and Johnson is about half that, just over 300. Maryland and Hazelwood is in between there, just over 400. A significantly fewer number of crossings, but still a good number of crossings up on Beam Avenue at White Bear, and then also at South Lawn, which is near the Maplewood Mall. As we go to the next slide, we can see that pedestrian volumes along White Bear Avenue sit somewhere in the middle of those numbers, with the high end being 240 crossings at Jarvis, with the smallest number at County Road B with 135 crossings during that same period. Now, what's interesting about White Bear Avenue is we've heard quite a bit anecdotally that pedestrians avoid crossing White Bear Avenue due to the number of cars and the poor crossing conditions that just create that perception of not really being a safe crossing. So we believe that those existing conditions are probably suppressing the number of pedestrians who might cross if conditions were improved. We also have been taking a close look at existing right-of-way widths. Here you can see the identification of 5 different segments along the corridor. The narrowest right-of-ways are at the south end along Maryland Avenue and then White Bear Avenue just south of Larpenteur. We've got 66, 67 feet of right-of-way in those areas, roughly speaking, which is about the size of the smallest option that we can look at to include transit operations. And so that really constrains, we're really constrained in those southern parts and been very careful to look at options that minimize any impacts to property and right-of-way needs in that section of the corridor. As we get north of Larpenteur, we've got some more opportunities. The right-of-way is a bit wider, and that gives us more opportunities to look at different types of options for integrating a transit way into those roadways. From a safety analysis standpoint, so we did want to make sure that we were looking at and considering just both vehicle and pedestrian safety along this corridor. You can see we've got 7 intersections that are experiencing crashes higher than we would expect, typically in a road of this size with this amount of traffic volumes. And again, those higher crash intersections are located towards the southern end of the corridor, particularly on Maryland. And we're very much aware of the need to have this project improve those safety conditions if at all possible. So as we moved from looking at those existing conditions and started to conceive the possible approaches to integrating a transit way, we established some guideposts that are articulated on this slide to guide the universe of options. And these guideposts are really based a lot on the project purpose and need. Why are we doing the project in the first place? And the basis, which becomes the basis for which we can seek federal transit funds to make the improvements in this corridor. So as a basic rule, we wanted to look at options that had no more than 4 lanes of vehicular traffic, including the transitway along this corridor. Also, we did not want to look at any grade separated options, and that is primarily out of respect for that narrow right-of-way and wanting to minimize any property impacts along this corridor. Similar to that, we also wanted to make sure that we were looking at good station access locations, and we talked about that with you last month. Transit options, Maryland segment needs to be both operational for Purple Line and for the planned H line arterial BRT system. That's planned to continue on Maryland west of the corridor and then proceed down south on White Bear Avenue, moving toward the Gold Line corridor. And we wanted to make sure that our options provided either exclusive or semi-exclusive transit lanes. And that was really to make sure that the project had eligibility, as I said, for that FTA CIG program, which is the last item on the list. And in order to be able to meet some of the requirements for a New Starts program, wanted to make sure we had a minimum of 50% fixed guideway throughout the entirety of the corridor, recognizing that this segment is just a portion of that. Next, we then looked at applying that defining the universe criteria to a number of cross sections. And Lisa is going to talk us through this portion of the presentation.
Yeah, so next we're going to walk you through the cross sections that we evaluated. We're going to see this slide again later on in the presentation, but just to help orientate you with these different options here, the table on the right, the information and how we have organized it, we've really organized it into 3 different segments. So one is the Maryland Avenue segment. The other one, which we're calling White Bear Avenue South, is the St. Paul portion of White Bear, which is south of Larpenteur, and then White Bear Avenue North, which is north of Larpenteur. So that sort of is the 3 key segments here. The different cross-section configurations are listed in the table, and we're going to walk through those so you all can see and understand what those were. And then we wanted to share with you some of the key factors that really rose out of the universe of alternatives and really ended up being key differentiators for alternatives. One of them was avoiding full parcel takes, wanting to minimize that in the areas in between stations. The operational reliability and safety was a key consideration as we went through this universe of alternatives process. And then prioritizing the exclusive or semi-exclusive transit lanes, which essentially means providing priority for the bus in these corridors. We can go to the next slide, and we'll start to walk through these options. So the first 2 cross sections that are on the side are our side running options. The top option is what we're calling semi-exclusive and a side with no median, which essentially is 4 lanes of roadway. 2 of those lanes, a northbound, southbound, or eastbound, westbound, would be bus only. The bottom cross section incorporates in the addition of a median. This median would be in the middle of the roadway, would provide access management, and also provide some potential opportunities for additional pedestrian refuge area within the middle of the roadway. We do use the terminology semi-exclusive and want to highlight to you all what that means is that these are bus-only lanes, but they would likely be utilized for cars that are accessing businesses or residences or right turn lanes. There's no physical separation between the lane and the general purpose lane. Go to the next slide. Next are our center running options. So this moves the guideway from the outside of the roadway into the middle of the roadway. In both of these, we have a northbound and a southbound or east and westbound bus lanes in the middle. The top cross sections has a median that is in the middle of the roadway. So this allows and provides some access management to prohibit left turns going across the guideway, allowing the bus to have more free-flowing movements. On the bottom is our dedicated guideway. This moves the median from being in between the 2 bus lanes to being on the outside of the bus lanes, providing a physical separation between the general purpose lanes and the transit priority lanes. Our next 2 cross sections are the dedicated guideway side and reversible lane. So the top cross section is the dedicated guideway side. This option puts the transit lanes on one side of the roadway and the general purpose lanes on the other side of the roadway. The two roadways essentially would be divided by a median to provide separation between the 2 facilities. The bottom cross section is the reversible lane. This is a single bus lane that would allow a bus to travel northbound or southbound within the lane. So there would be opportunities for buses to basically enter into this lane or out of this lane, depending on if it's going north or southbound. Buses that are traveling in the opposite direction would be in mixed traffic on either side of the roadway. And our last set of cross sections are what we call the 3-lane section and mixed traffic. So the top cross section is the 3-lane section. This provides a transit lane in one direction of the roadway. So in this graphic, it's on the right side of the cross section. Then there would be 3 general purpose lanes, a northbound and a southbound, and then a center turn lane. So we still maintain the 4 lanes across, but with 1 transit priority lane in the opposite direction, buses would be traveling in mixed traffic. And then on the bottom, we did look at and evaluate mixed traffic within all of these segments as well. All right, I mentioned to you that we were going to see this slide before. Won't spend a lot of time here, but we're going to walk through how these key factors played into identifying which alternatives would advance forward into the tier 2 analysis. We can go to the next slide. We're going to start with avoiding full parcel takes. So on the table on the right, you can see the little circle with an X with a line through it, which indicates that those alternatives, those cross sections applied to certain segments of the corridor, did not meet the criteria we identified that Beth went through earlier. So for the avoiding full parcel takes, within Maryland Avenue, the exclusive center and dedicated options, as well as that dedicated side option that we ran through, all 3 of those would have required full parcel takes if they were to advance forward. So we identified that those would not advance forward. Similarly, on White Bear Avenue South, those alternatives also came off the table because they would require full parcel takes. In White Bear Avenue South, also the semi-exclusive, where we incorporated median, also resulted in full parcel takes. So we identified that to not proceed forward. Next, we're going to talk about the operational reliability and safety. For this particular factor, the reversible or bidirectional lane, which was the single lane that allowed a bus to go northbound or southbound in it, we identified that to be eliminated as part of this universe of alternatives. It identified and created some reliability and safety concerns that were brought up by Metro Transit and were identified to prohibit it from moving forward. And lastly was the exclusive or semi-exclusive transit lanes. Based off of the criteria that was set and Beth walked through earlier, the mixed traffic alternative came off the table for all 3 of the segments in the corridor due to it not providing that exclusive or semi-exclusive transit lane. So where does that leave us? So the slide before, we had a bunch of circles with the line through it indicating which alternatives were eliminated. The table has now been revised to show check marks which alternatives are moving forward to the tier 1 analysis. So within Maryland Avenue, we had 3 cross sections that were identified to move forward into the tier 1 analysis. In White Bear Avenue, the southern portion of the corridor, we had 2 alternatives that advanced forward. And the White Bear Avenue portion north of Larpenteur, most of the alternatives were identified to advance forward, except for the reversible and mixed traffic alternatives. This graphic just shows you the pictorial view of the alternatives that were identified to move forward. We have the semi-exclusive on the left, the center running dedicated and exclusive in the middle, the dedicated side in the top right, and the semi-exclusive, the 3-lane section in the bottom right of the table. So all of these alternatives were advanced into the tier 1 evaluation. And just to refresh, and I kind of shared a little bit about this when I was walking through the table, but the alternatives that did not advance was the reversible or bidirectional. Some information about why we felt like the advantages were duplicated by other alternatives that were shared and are moving forward. Operationally, the reversible lane does have some significant challenges if it's implemented for a significant distance. The reliability and the performance of that alternative becomes more challenging. And there's also a lot more signaling, safety concerns due to that directionality of the bus. Sometimes you may see a bus going the same direction as you are if you're in a car. Other times you may see it coming towards you. And so we're concerned about the confusion that may offer. And the mixed traffic also came out. Again, referencing back to the 50% dedicated guideway requirement, and not meeting the criteria for exclusive or semi-exclusive. I do want to note that on mixed traffic, we will likely have portions of the corridor that will require mixed traffic just to transition between different configurations. So there will be areas just not wanting it to be an entire segment.
So after completing our defining the universe of options, we move to our tier 1 screening. We're looking at starting how to combine those different cross-section elements into full corridors. And the tier 1 process will review right now, we'll show you how we got to the 4 options that we are recommending today. So as I said, and you just saw in a slide from Lisa a few moments ago, so moving to the next slide, Craig, we did have these 6 cross-section options, which we are combining in their various corridor segments. And next slide, early in the tier 1 process, we did determine that we needed to eliminate the dedicated side running cross-section that Lisa just described earlier. What we found was, as we started to look at sections of the corridor where that might be appropriate, we found significant concerns with those driveways that I referenced earlier. And looking at the number of driveways that vehicles would need to cross, both moving into and coming out of properties on the side where that dedicated transitway was located, and then also interfering potentially with the reliability of that transitway if a vehicle paused in the transitway as they were coming out of a property in order to merge into traffic. It just created a lot of safety concerns and operational issues that we felt did not merit that cross-section moving forward. So then we took our 5 remaining cross-section types, next slide, and looked at 6 different combinations, making the most sense of what combinations based really how they could piece together to form a cohesive whole along Maryland and White Bear up to Beam, based on the matrix that Lisa just went through with you that had the circles with the crosshatch and the checks. So these are the 6 combinations that we came up with, and we then applied our tier 1 screening criteria to these 6 options. Next slide. And those criteria really built off of the criteria that we looked at in defining the universe. We were looking at concept dimensions. Does these meet the minimum dimensions that are acceptable to both Metro Transit and to Ramsey County and the cities as they were looking at sort of optimal dimensions for that? The continuity of the guideway configuration from segment to segment. So how many times are we transitioning where the buses would sit in relationship to other traffic? Again, taking a closer look at property impacts, still very high level, still focused on just generally the width of that option, but taking a closer look at where would we just have strip takings. But in some areas, because of the proximity of the buildings to the right-of-way, even a small strip taking could result in a total right-of-way take because we're impacting the building. So we took a closer look at those, really wanting to avoid that type of impact. We reflected on the needs, as I said, that we were getting from engagement activities. So what were the needs of transit users, the business owners and the residents that we had engaged to date? Agency, the support of the various agencies involved in the project, taking a closer look at safety concerns, station access, traffic options, so traffic operations, excuse me. Not that we had traffic modeling yet, that's something that we'll come to in our tier 2 analysis, but just using that best engineering judgment. Did this feel like a option that would allow traffic to move freely. And then similar with transit operations, really wanting to look at making sure our options didn't have conflicts in the guideway that would support reliability of transit options in as they move through the corridor, that it supported the local bus network as well as Purple Line operations, and then a preliminary assessment of maintenance requirements. As we're building things, we want to make sure that we're creating sustainable options that are reasonable to maintain. So moving through all of those key criteria, we did find that they did result in some key differentiators that moved us from the 6 options down to the 4. And some of that was the transition throughout the corridor from the side running to center running. As you think about a bus moving from the outside of traffic lanes, then to the inside of traffic lanes, you can think that if we've got a lot of those transitions, that starts to create problems for operations, both in the transitway, but also for traffic in general. As I said, looking at those right-of-way impacts, we did find that some had more property impacts than others. Looking at property access and local roadway access, the number of right-in, right-out restrictions that might be created through the options, the reliability of that transitway, and then pedestrian safety at local street intersections. And coming up with that and reviewing those differentiators. Next slide, Craig. This is the end results that came out of that screening as we reviewed the results of that evaluation with the IRT group, SMT, and TAC. And we determined that through that process that 4 of these options should move forward to Tier 2. First off, we decided to combine options A and B. The key difference between options A and B was whether or not we were going to include a median in the middle of the road along Maryland Avenue. Option A did not have the median, option B had the median. And as we ran it through our various evaluation criteria, found that that median very much could help improve traffic operations and safety in the corridor, could provide pedestrian refuge for those crossing the roadway, but also could result in property impacts or right-in, right-out closures. And it was too hard to tell at this high level without having a developed layout whether that would make sense or not. So we decided to combine those two and take our best look at where medians would make sense through the Tier 2 layout development process. The last option, option F, we decided to eliminate at this time. As you can see, that's the only option that looked at combining 3 different types of cross sections. And we just felt that with that constant transition and change in expectations, that would not be an ideal combination for either transit operators or the public who was trying to understand where are the buses going to be within the roadway. So we determined that we would eliminate option F at this time, leaving us with 4 options, which Lisa is now going to walk us through.
Yes, so we're going to walk through and show you some graphics. And a lot of you are seeing this for the first time, and so we want to make sure you understand how these different alternatives tie together to create the continuous alternative. So we're going to start off with looking at option the AB, which is the semi-exclusive side running. You can go to the next slide. The table is set up similarly to the table on the previous slide, where we have Maryland Avenue, White Bear Avenue South, and White Bear Avenue North. The top row here is a picture of the existing conditions. So we'll walk through Maryland Avenue first. These pictures on future slides are all going to be the same, but just to help refresh your memories on what these segments look like. So Maryland Avenue is an existing 4-lane section today. The middle row here is the proposed cross section, which is the side running. Now, again, what Beth just shared, places may have a median, some places may not have a median. What's represented here is no median, but we are looking at that and we'll incorporate that where it's needed. And then this bottom row is the plan view. So instead of having to be a cross section, what does it look like if you're looking at it from the top view down, to show the 2 general purpose lanes here in gray and the transit only lanes in pink. I will just remind you all that there are these cars that are sort of grayed in on the pink lanes. Again, that's just to represent that those lanes would likely have some cars in them, either accessing businesses, properties, or right turn lanes in the corridor. White Bear Avenue South, again, that side running cross section in the middle, and then that plan view. And then for the White Bear Avenue North portion, the geometry changes as we go north. Not only the right of way gets a little bit wider, there is also a large portion of that corridor that has an existing left turn lane or median there today. So we would, as this side running option advances forward, we would incorporate in that median to match more closely with existing conditions out there today. We can go to the next slide. So option C is similar on Maryland and White Bear Avenue, south portion of the corridor. We are introducing in the center guideway into that northern portion. We can go to the next slide. So Maryland and White Bear Avenue South, those 2 columns are similar to the previous version. You will see in White Bear Avenue North is where we would introduce in that center running guideway configuration. So we've moved the guideway from the outside of the roadway to the inside. And that's the difference with option C. We go to the next slide. Option D is we have the 3-lane roadway that has a single transit lane with a center running guideway in White Bear Avenue, the northern portion of White Bear Avenue. Go to the next slide. So Maryland Avenue, White Bear Avenue South, we are introducing in that 3 lane. So what you see within the cross section that we have a single pink lane. Again, buses would, in one direction would be in that pink lane. They would be in mixed traffic in the other direction. We have not identified yet which direction would be the transit priority lane. It could be northbound or it could be southbound. Again, the plan view, you can see what that looks like. We have the general purpose lanes here in gray, and then the transit only lane in pink. And then we would transition somewhere between in the Larpenteur area from that 3-lane section into a center running guideway where the bus only lanes are in the middle of the roadway. And then next slide. And then option E, which is our 4th option, we are proposing that instead of a center running guideway in the northern portion of White Bear, that it is now a semi-exclusive or side running alternative. And you can go to the next slide. So again, Maryland Avenue, White Bear Avenue South, those 2 portions are the same as the previous alternative. White Bear Avenue North changes from a center running guideway to a side running guideway. So now the dedicated lanes are on the outside of the roadway versus in the middle. And we would incorporate in a median in that northern portion, again, to sort of match existing conditions that are out there today. So this is a summary of the 4 alternatives that are advancing forward. Hopefully that walkthrough of the cross sections and plan view help you visualize what these alternatives are as they get applied to the different segments of the corridor.
That is a lot of information. Really appreciate it, Beth and Lisa. The devil's in the details, and there's a lot of details here. And I really appreciate you not only kind of telling us how we got here, but how we're really kind of what we're advancing going forward through this tier 1 screening process. So let's just pause, and if there's any comments, questions, and discussion at this point for the project team.
I have a quick question on behalf of the council member. I'm going to assume that we're moving on to a point in this presentation where we talk about how the 4 to 3 lane conversion is no longer an option.
Yeah, let's address that. It's my understanding the project team is aware of the request from City of St. Paul to consider this 4 to 3 option, and maybe Craig can kind of walk us through the project team's assessment of looking at that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And J-Lor, yes, the project team is aware of the request. This request originally came up a few weeks ago from St. Paul staff through the issue resolution team process. So we discussed it there, and then we discussed it about a week later at the technical advisory committee. And I will skip to some slides at the end of this slide deck, because I want to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about as when we are talking about a 4 to 3 lane conversion. So sticking with the theme that Beth and Lisa had in terms of how we're showing this, so everybody has a understanding. What the request is to consider a 4 to 3 conversion on Maryland and White Bear Avenue South, or south of Larpenteur. And what this would look like in the cross-section form is a lane in each direction with a center turn lane. That's for both segments. And then on the plan view, you can see that here as well. And the key piece here is transit would operate in mixed traffic. Transit would not be provided any advantage, any pink lanes, exclusive or semi-exclusive under this concept. So that's what the concept is. That's what was requested for consideration. So it's essentially a variation of the mixed traffic option that was identified and screened out as part of the universe of options that Lisa covered earlier. And now I'll talk a little bit about why project staff did not recommend and support the city's request to advance forward a 4 to 3 conversion as part of the tier 2 evaluation that's going to be taking place on the options that are advancing forward. So first, it's contrary to previous policy direction. The letter that Ramsey County sent to the city of Maplewood at the end of March was pretty specific in terms of taking a pause from advancing forward on the Bruce Central Trail corridor and now looking at the White Bear Avenue, Beam, and Maryland corridors. And that really focused on acknowledging that as part of that process, there would be a conversion of 1 lane in each direction to a dedicated bus lane. So that is language directly from that county letter to the city of Maplewood. And then, if you recall, this body took a concurrence action shortly after that letter in early April. And specifically, that action is on this slide here, concurred with moving forward with the feasibility and viability of Purple Line operating in dedicated lanes on a reconfigured White Bear Avenue. And so this 4 to 3 lane conversion is different than that policy direction that was provided. And then on these big projects, we often focus a lot on risks. Risks as we move forward, risks that we need to mitigate and manage as we move forward. And some of those key risks associated with the 4 to 3 conversion as it relates to this transit project is a little bit about what Lisa mentioned as part of the criteria that was used with the universe of options, as well as the tier 1 evaluation or screening, is that in order to maintain eligibility within the federal program that we're pursuing transit funds from, the federal government has an expectation that we provide at least 50% fixed guideway from end to end on a project like this. And as was noted, I think in an earlier slide, technically we could have mixed traffic. It could be a 4 to 3 conversion or just straight up mixed traffic on 1 segment of the 5 segments and still be above that 50%. We'd be at about 55%. Now, I'll say 55% is very close to 50%, and there's a lot of work ahead of us to do. We know that there's going to be transitions from different types of cross sections where I think Lisa noted earlier, we're probably going to have to use mixed traffic. So every place that we use mixed traffic chips away at that 55%. So we could end up finding ourselves at the end of this tier 2 evaluation as we know more design and engineering detail. Even accommodating mixed traffic on one full segment would set us below the 50%. And what we do know is that combining any two of the five segments would set us below 50% down to 47%, which would make us ineligible for future federal transit funds through this program. The other piece to note is that setting aside bullet number 1, just assume we're eligible for federal funds through this transit program. The roadway reconstruction to convert a roadway from 4 to 3 is not an eligible expense for federal transit dollars. And that is because, just applying common sense, there's no transit advantage to rebuilding, say, Maryland Avenue or Whiteberry Avenue south of Larpenteur, to completely reconstruct the roadway, to bring the curb lines in, to create that 3-lane versus 4-lane. There's no transit advantage. Therefore, the Federal Transit Administration would not allow that to be an eligible expense. And then back to why are we doing this project? One of the main reasons we're doing this project, this corridor today has transit in it. The Route 54 operates there, plus 2 local routes. And then there's a future H line envisioned as well on the Maryland portion. So speed and reliability. We're attempting to make it better and more attractive as a transportation option in this corridor. And so making an improvement beyond what the transit customer experiences today with those existing services. And so going from a 4 to 3 with no transit advantage is inherently going to slow the operating speed in those remaining lanes. So transit today and future transit will operate slower than transit does today. So that's a speed piece. And then reliability is also likely to be impacted as well. So we're not even holding constant the existing conditions. We're actually going to make it worse for transit through a 4 to 3. And then going back to the purpose and need of the project that was established years ago that guided the environmental review of the original project, we agreed that these all still hold purpose, even in a post-COVID environment. And basically that this 4 to 3 conversion would be inconsistent with attempting to meet the needs and purpose of the project. That continues to be our guiding light as we go forward and evaluate this corridor. Lastly, I think one of the reasons that we understand of the St. Paul's request for this 4 to 3 conversion is to bring and address the pedestrian safety ills of the corridor that were talked about earlier by Lisa and Beth. We recognize that the White Bear and Maryland corridor is has some of the highest crash rates and is in least safe conditions within the county roadway system. And we knew that at the outset that we were going to have to address that as part of this transit project. This was going to go beyond just being a transit project. And so we believe the options that we have advanced forward or are recommending to advance forward that are within those 4 options that Lisa and Beth talked about, we can bring safer pedestrian crossings that would come with a 4 to 3 conversion in those other options.
Yeah, we're just going to listen to this comment, and we'll get to comments here in a minute. Thanks.
And Mr. Chair, this is my last slide, so we
Okay.
can go to J-Law and anybody else's questions or comments.
Great, thanks. But before we get to the comments, and absolutely we want to hear, but I just want to boil it down here as to why there's concern about the 4 to 3 conversion. It's it jeopardizes the federal funding. That's kind of like a big issue, and the fact that the 4 to 3 conversion as part of the project would take away the advantage for transit, and that also compromises the federal funds, but it also is not part of the established purpose and need of this project. And so that there are ways to address safety, but in other ways is kind of how I'm hearing it. And it's also kind of not the intent for the county.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
if I could present the county position as well, it's
Yeah, why don't we,
consistent with what.
sure, why don't we just hear from the county quickly, and then absolutely we'll get to a comment from St. Paul. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Okay, and Commissioner Mai Chong-Zhang is also on this call. And if after I go through the county's position, there's questions, she is ready, willing, and able to step in here as well. The 4-to-3 conversion is obviously, we don't feel that it's the way we should go forward for this project. Funding eligibility, I think Craig really handled all of those, so I'm not going to go through that. Being a transformative project, I think a 4-to-3 project is a mill and overlay, and with restriping and not a full roadway construction, so you don't get the pavement, utility, sidewalks associated with dedicated lanes. The dedicated lanes would really transform the roadways by maximizing the transit advantage, improving mobility, and enhancing safety in the corridor, again, as outlined by Craig. The reduced reliability, and then probably the most important part as far as how this project goes forward is county funding. And Ramsey County will not fund a mixed traffic bus project, as stated in our letter before. And I think that's, I can't say it any stronger than that, I guess. Arterial BRT, which if you wanted to put it in mixed traffic, is funded by Metro Transit, and not Ramsey County. And I guess the most important part, because one of the things that I've heard in other settings as well is, well, why not just study it? And I think that there is a real risk in just studying it, because the public would expect that if you're studying something that it's a possible option, and it is not. And so I think that it is very, it's going to be expensive, it's going to be time consuming, and Ramsey County will not go forward with this project if it doesn't meet the federal guidelines, and the 4-to-3 conversion would not. And so, and I know that's pretty blunt, but it's something that I think is important. I don't want to mislead anyone. And so by simply saying, go ahead and study it, to me, that is misleading to the public. And I would not, the county is not going to go forward if that's the case. And so I think we get all the positives with the road reconstruction, all of the positives, the safety, and all of those things that we're looking for. And we are consistent with the vision that we've had from day one of the Purple Line. And so Ramsey County is not supporting adding it in. Again, when you get to the bottom line of it all, it's really about what expectations are. And I don't think that it's fair to the public or the cost to the project to say, we'll consider this, we'll study it. When we know from the get-go, from the Ramsey County perspective, and without Ramsey County, I don't think there's a project probably, but we will not go forward with it because we don't have the federal funding to go with it. And so if Mai Chong, if you wanted to just say a few words, you can certainly do that, or we can wait until after Councilmember Yang's staff person has asked some questions as well.
Well, and Jennifer has been very patient, so you have your hand up. But yeah, sure. Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, thank you so much for that insight. We understand from the get-go that, the 4-3 lane conversion would disqualify the Purple Line project from federal transit funds. And so that's not an intractable problem to us. I think more so the Councilmember Yang is just interested in hearing about the alternative investments being made to White Bear Avenue in general. I mean, it's not a very safe road, as you all mentioned, right? And a lot of it does have to do with the drivability of it, right? If you're on those outer lanes on the right end, you're hitting potholes at every intersection. And so those are concerns that the council member has, because the drivability and safety for vehicles is also a concern, given that bus does affect the line of sight for vehicles operating on White Bear Avenue. And so those are conversations that she's really interested in. And then the other part is the transparency of costs, right? And so given that the 3-lane option is not an option, and it's not something that the county wants to invest in, her questions are more so on whether or not the project cost remains the same, and what kind of effort is being done to keep that budget transparent so that CMC members are making an informed decision based on that transparent cost.
Well, that's really helpful questions. And I think the idea of transparency and understanding also what safety improvements will be contemplated, as well as everything, including sightlines, is something that should definitely be part of the project investigation. So I really appreciate those comments.
And we agree. Those are really important questions, and I think that they all need to be answered. But I don't think the answers to that, improve safety and so forth, that we need more information on, that would not be accomplished through a mill and overlay. But it would be accomplished if we do the full road reconstruction, which is part of the dedicated guideway. I think we're on the same page as far as what we want the outcomes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, may I just add some insights to this too? We know what a 4-to-3 conversion looks like on Maryland. Right now, from 35E to Johnson Parkway is a 3-way traffic. And that still doesn't resolve a lot of the issues that our constituents have been raising around safety, crossing the street. And I fear that we will get that same type of project if we're just pushing for a 4-to-3 conversion, and that we aren't using this opportunity to fully investigate different pedestrian enhancement options here. That includes the dedicated transit ways, and also or the mixed transit ways. With that said, I do have some questions for the presenters with what's presented about Maryland and not having the medians. I am concerned that it will continue to kind of look like the status quo, and just having those 2 dedicated lanes for the buses, or that's just kind of striped for it. What will deter folks from using those guideways as just another lane of traffic?
Who can answer that? Is that Beth, Lisa?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it, and Craig and or Lisa may want to add on to that. On other dedicated busways that we've worked on across the country, there are a variety of options. Sometimes that's the use of a diamond symbology in the lane, and we've seen that in some locations here in the Twin Cities, indicating that that is primarily indicated as a bus lane. In some circumstances, those lanes can be treated with a different color or type of asphalt, again, trying to indicate that it is not available for open usage, that it is dedicated to those turning vehicles and transit vehicles. In other cases, and this was actually considered as part of our universe of options, but eliminated because of the amount of right-of-way in some circumstances, but are certainly still part of the options, would be to use medians to identify where and separate general purpose traffic lanes from the bus traffic lanes. But we have to be very careful about how and where we use medians, both in terms of emergency vehicles, but then that also would prohibit general traffic from using those bus lanes to either turn in and out of properties or to make the right turns onto other roadways as well. So those are all things that we'll explore during the layout development process in Tier 2, but is certainly a concern, and not just from general traffic, but as we said again, that reliability of the operations of the transitway is also really important to Metro Transit. So we want to be taking that into consideration.
Great, thank you.
Nick,
Chair, if I could follow up on that also.
Sure, go ahead, Nick.
So we do, in the Twin Cities, we've been installing lanes like this on a couple of our some of our transitways. E-line we will be installing on Hennepin Avenue, and B-line this fall and next spring on Selby and Lake. And so prior to Purple Line being open, I think we'll have some experience about how we can make this work effectively. We do have some limited knowledge from the Twin Cities that they are effective, and some national. So I think we do have some confidence that we can make these work based on our experience and our peers.
Thanks for that comment, Nick. That's absolutely right. And we actually have it in some places now, like on 7th Street in Minneapolis and others where there's real clear indications that it's bus only. Okay, any other comments? I want to give chance for Stephen Smith to present on some of these roadway design and transit design concepts, and we'll and have time for a few more questions after that. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will also have, this is really about kind of the next steps, the next phase that we're embarking on. And I'm gonna have Liz also help me out, talk a little bit about community engagement in that next phase too as well. Go to the next slide. So I really just want to focus everyone's attention inside the box. I think all the great conversation that we just had really just kind of segues into what we're about to talk about now, which is kind of building blocks on top of the tier 1 screening, but now we're moving into the tier 2 evaluation, meaning that all of the questions related to getting to that layout, getting to the traffic analysis, that's what we're going to end up be focused. But that's what the traffic team or the Purple Line team is going to focus on. And one thing I also want to kind of bring your attention to is that we're here in October. The next time that we plan to bring some information to you related to how all the 4 options that we presented today is basically performing and rating out. We plan to bring that to you around the March timeframe. There's a lot of time in between now and March, so we're hoping to be able to maintain that time frame with all the detailed analysis that we have to do in these coming months. But you know, one of the things that we're going to be doing in the tier 2 analysis, and I have another slide that's going to talk about this a little bit more, is that we're going to start trying to pull together the rating analysis, and that's going to probably land somewhere in that January, February timeframe, where we're going to start understanding what that ridership and cost and rating really looks like. So here in the fall, kind of to what everyone was talking about, trying to get to that design level, that preliminary layout. And one of the things that we're going to do, and really thinking about safety as we're just talking about that, is that we plan to meet with all the different stakeholders. So we plan to meet with the city of St. Paul. We plan to meet with the city of Maplewood and really go over those challenges that we see within some of these intersections or segments. So we want to talk about pet refuges and really talking about what's in our safety toolbox. We plan to start working directly with staff to talk about what these layouts and how we can actually make improvements in the corridor. Also, we plan to start with ridership. So taking those 4 options that we just went over today, now that we have them, we can start building off of that and start creating ridership, start thinking about the costs when we start getting into the layouts, the safety analysis, seeing how are we actually directly improving some of these intersections. As you saw before, we have a few intersections that are having crashes above what's expected. So how do we address that as project staff? So these are things that we're thinking about, definitely. Traffic analysis. Now that we have the 4 options, we can start running the traffic analysis and start trying to figure out what that looks like. And then the evaluation of all the different options. So we plan on really taking that through the evaluation criteria. And then shortly here, I'm going to show you what that looks like. Q1 in 2024, again, that's when I kind of mentioned is where we would actually have the project rating. And then we're going to be doing a lot of community engagement throughout the fall and winter, but especially hitting the ground hard in Q1. And I will let Liz kind of go into more detail about that. Next slide. So evaluation criteria, you kind of saw a little bit of the evaluation criteria in tier 1. Some of that spills over into tier 2, but really starting to dig deep into, well, what does the property impacts really look like? station access, sidewalk apps. All these things are what we're really taking a look at. But what this slide is really trying to do is indicate to you all, there's a lot of different ways to slice this up. And we have a lot of different ways of really looking at this to make sure that when we're picking the right solution, that we're looking at it through all these different criteria categories. And again, this is where we start getting into understanding the cost, ridership, and viability of it all. But more importantly too as well is the public and outreach that we plan to do too as well. Don't want to forget that. That's something that's really important to this process. So I'm going to let Liz talk a little bit more about next steps related to outreach.
Thanks, Stephen, and Chair and committee members. I know I touched on this briefly earlier in the presentation, but really, like Stephen reiterated, focusing heavily on early next year, once we do actually have these concept layouts for folks to react to that has a little bit more detail on pedestrian access, on property impacts, on accessing the stations. And once there's a little bit more refined design, we'll have a number of open houses and work groups and individual meetings with community and business groups and stakeholders. We also have a few set up with our agency partners, so Maplewood City Council, and talking with the St. Paul Planning Commission of their Transportation Committee again. So once we have that level of detail and again, those layouts and further information to react to, we'll have that really big engagement push with a lot of conversations with our partners in the community. But then just kind of wanted to list again, like we talked about earlier, this October through December time, it's almost a tier 1.5. It's kind of that bridge between tier 1 and tier 2 to make sure that we are still talking to folks and continuing to build the feedback and information awareness building from the community on this, everything that we're looking at from station locations and existing conditions, so that we can have the best information possible once we come out with these exact layouts to have more focused conversations. So just wanted to mention that we are not pausing at all throughout this fall and early winter timeframe. We're still going to be out talking to folks.
Well, thanks, Liz, and thanks, Stephen. It really helps to have a frame as to what we're going into in this next phase, and it looks like we're diving pretty deeply into the details, some of which we've discussed. So let's just kind of open up. Any other questions for the project team or comments at this point? Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stephen had already mentioned this too, but about I would really like a lot of emphasis around our current intersections where we know it's where it's not as safe and where there are higher crashes than normal. And then in addition to that, Hazelwood in Maryland has been a place where there has been a lot of crime recently too, but also consistently in the past. I know that our police have been, they're rotating the cameras. They're doing its best too. But I want to see if we can do some, just design it in a way that deters crime or that doesn't allow for crime to be happening in the area. So I would like some partnership in that with law enforcement too, to think about the design.
Yeah, great comment. And we know from our work in our various safety initiatives that part of it is bringing some more defensive and customer welcoming design. And we've learned a lot. So we wanted to make sure we're deploying that in particularly a new project. And as we operate these transitways, we had to ensure that we kind of start with a clean slate and keep it welcoming and safe environment for our customers. So they're really great. We'd never lose sight of that. Any other thoughts today?
Councilmember Villavicencio has a question, I believe, or a comment.
Oh, great. Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry, I haven't seen all the hands.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to second what Commissioner Maichon said. As someone who uses the bus, actually the 54 bus on a regular basis, I've seen a lot of issues that I'd love to go further in on with many of you at this virtual table. But to save you a lot of time, I also want to see a partnership with law enforcement and other nonprofits in our communities where we can do intervention before things get to points where police are even needed. And I know there are things in the works getting to that point, but I think we need to figure out ways to do it more quickly than not. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, council member. And everybody should know we actually have initiated this transit intervention project with social services and multi-jurisdictions. We actually had a leadership meeting last week at Metro Transit, and I'll make sure that this Purple Line CMC that you're all kind of brought up to speed and are aware of some of these efforts as they build. I mean, this is going to be an ongoing this will be an ongoing effort. It doesn't just last one year, although there's legislature provided specific funding to get us going. We're not going to we're going to kind of have to keep that that engaged, and knowing that we, in order to kind of create safety and welcoming environment, it goes beyond just enforcement. It goes right beyond just law enforcement. It has to be multi-jurisdictional, and this is why I really love this intervention project, because it involves so many different entities, public and private and nonprofit, to kind of come together. Well, now I'm looking for hands, but I know we've covered a lot of material today. Honestly, hats off to staff who really kept us going through a lot, and these PowerPoints will be posted. So there's information I know I want to go back and look at again, but we're going to have that chance. Also, in future meetings, as Stephen noted, we have meetings scheduled every month. I think next one's in November. However, we likely will be canceling some of these meetings in the next few months while a lot of work is being done, and we'll kind of pick it up as we need it. But we can certainly expect it in that kind of March, April timeframe, and then knowing that we can always, if something's happening or as it develops, there's going to be a lot of engagement along the way. So I expect CMC members can be in kind of connected to the work in the multiple ways, either through staff or certainly we can be speaking to each other. So with that, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. This is really important meeting today, and I think that we got through a lot of really good material, and appreciate everybody's interest. And with that, I'll give you 2 minutes to your day. How about that? All right, this meeting's adjourned. Thanks,
Great meeting.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.